Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Watt, and today I'm going to be telling y'all a little bit about Robert T. Morris, the accidental father of cybersecurity. How many of you have ever had to deal with a computer virus or worm that you got from downloading something off the internet? Robert T. Morris was the first person to create such a string of code. Today, I want to tell y'all a little bit about his early life, the Morris worm, and its implications in the world of cybersecurity, as well as cover some of the successes after him releasing the worm. So, according to People Pill, he was born November 8th, 1965, in Massachusetts. He was born to Robert Morris. This would be his gateway into a world of computers. I'll tell you a little more about him in just a little bit. Robert attended Harvard University and Cornell University, so he's obviously very gifted. Robert's first year at Cornell would be when he releases the worm. So a little bit about Robert Morris Sr., Robert Morris's father. He was a computer scientist and cryptographer at Bell Labs. He helped design Unix and Multics, so if you have an iPhone, they all run Unix to this day. This early exposure to computers is where Robert Morris, his son, first developed his love for computers because Robert Morris Sr. was an early innovator, so he had early access to a lot of this technology. Robert Morris Sr. also later becomes the chief scientist at the National Computer Security Center, a part of the NSA. So a little bit about the Morris worm. It was the first internet worm ever created. In 1998, Robert T. Morris's first year of graduate school at Cornell University, he hacks into an MIT terminal from Cornell to hide his tracks when he releases the worm into the MIT system. Now, according to FBI Gov, the worm only targeted computers running a specific version of the Unix operating system, something you could tell he was probably pretty familiar with. Although the worm had no effect on the data itself of a given system, it did have some major impacts. Those being vital military and university functions slow to a crawl, emails were delayed for days, and the network community labored to figure out how the worm worked and how to remove it. The fatal flaw in the Morris worm. Robert created the worm to see how big the internet was. He just wanted to see how far the internet would take it. He didn't mean any harm to be done. On this day says, intended to be harmless, Morris made a mistake in writing it. Morris was worried about network administrators and programmers that could put up false positives when the worm checked the system for infection. So he made the worm replicate itself 14% of the time, regardless of the answer to the check. So even if the system said, yes, I am infected, the worm would go ahead and replicate itself anyways. The Morris worm began replicating itself at a far faster rate than he intended, flooding hard drives and causing extensive damage. So the criminal prosecution, Robert was first person tried and convicted under the then new Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation, 400 hours of community service, and a fine of $10,000 according to Crime Museum. He did not receive jail time because, according to the judge, the Morris worm was not destructive malware. It only meant to slow the processing of the computers. He also had sought the help of two friends to help warn about the virus and try and mitigate some of its damage, but to little avail. So some of the implications it's had on cybersecurity, according to FBI.gov, just days after the attack, the country's first computer emergency response team was created. There also began development of computer intrusion detection softwares. The Morris worm inspired a new generation of hackers, but it also opened up people's eyes to the idea of cybernetic threats, and over the next 2 decades paved the way to a whole cybersecurity industry, which is now a huge industry with huge demand. So a little bit about his life after releasing the Morris worm. In 1995, he co-founded ViaWeb with Paul Graham and sold it for 3 years later for $49 million. So he's doing pretty good. 1999, he received his PhD from Harvard and was appointed assistant professor at MIT, where he released the bug. 7 years later, in 2006, he received tenure at MIT, and in 2015, he was elected as a member of the National Academy of Engineering. So, in conclusion, I have told you about Robert T. Morris's life, the Morris worm, and some of his later successes. Robert made huge ripples in the cyber world and set the stage for cybersecurity as a serious field of study. Next time you come across a potential virus, think about Robert T. Morris and how he unintentionally released the first virus on the internet and how many there are now. That concludes my speech. I will now open the floor for questions. Yes. Okay, I believe I heard, what is the difference between a virus and a worm? Now, I know I may have used those words interchangeably during the speech, but they are different. A virus depends on the activation of their host, to help replicate it, whereas a worm does it all by itself. It can replicate and propagate on their own once inside the system. I will now close the floor for questioning. If you have any more questions or if you'd like to talk, just see me after. Thank you.